He wasn't supposed to stop, not on a road like this, not at this hour, not for a dog standing perfectly still in the middle of the asphalt like it had nowhere else to be. The highway stretched empty for miles outside Flagstaff, a lonely ribbon of black cutting through cold desert air, the kind that seeped through steel and bone alike, carrying the faint scent of dust and distant pine. It was just past 2 a.m., the hour when even truckers grew quiet and the world seemed to hold its breath. Ethan Walker had been driving for 3 straight hours, hands steady on the wheel, eyes trained forward in that disciplined, almost mechanical way that never really left a Marine, even after discharge. The hum of the engine was low and constant, like a heartbeat beneath everything, and the radio had long since faded into static. He preferred it that way. Silence didn't ask questions. Silence didn't remind him of things he couldn't fix. The headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the dark, illuminating cracked pavement, faded lane markers, and nothing else, until something moved. At first, it didn't register as anything unusual, just a shape. Low, still, centered. Ethan narrowed his eyes slightly, easing his foot off the gas as the figure sharpened in the beam of light. A dog, a German shepherd, large, motionless, sitting directly in his lane. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, more out of habit than irritation. Most animals bolted at the sound of an approaching vehicle, instincts kicking in before thought ever had a chance. But this one didn't move, not even an inch. The distance closed faster than it should have. 50 yards. 40. 30. Ethan's grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. There was something off about it. Not panic, not aggression, just stillness. Deliberate. He tapped the brakes, the truck slowing as the tires hummed against the cold road. "Move," he said quietly, as if the animal could hear him through glass and steel. The dog didn't flinch. 20 yards now. The headlights washed fully over it, revealing the thick sable coat, the sharp lines of its ears, the steady posture of a trained animal. Not a stray, not wild. Something about the way it held itself, balanced, composed, felt almost military. Ethan's pulse shifted, not faster, just sharper. Alert. Then he noticed it. Something in the dog's mouth. At first, it looked like fabric. A bundle. Maybe trash caught in its teeth. But the way the dog held it, careful, precise, almost protective, didn't match that assumption. 15 yards. 10. Ethan pressed the brake harder now, the truck slowing to a crawl. The engine's hum deepened as it resisted the sudden deceleration. Still, the dog didn't move. It watched him. Not the truck. Him. Even through the windshield, Ethan felt it. That strange, quiet lock of attention, like being chosen in a crowd you didn't know you were part of. 5 yards. The truck rolled to a stop. Silence rushed in immediately, thick and heavy, broken only by the soft ticking of cooling metal under the hood. For a moment, neither of them moved. Ethan exhaled slowly, his breath fogging faintly in the cold cabin air. "All right," he said, voice low, steady. "What are you doing out here?" He reached for the door handle, but didn't pull it yet. His eyes stayed fixed on the dog, studying it the way he had been trained to study everything. Looking for tension, for threat, for intent. There was none, just that same unwavering stillness. And something else. Something he hadn't expected. The dog took one slow step forward. Not toward the truck. Just enough to shift its weight, to bring what it carried slightly more into view. The bundle moved. Barely. A flicker. Ethan froze. His breath caught. Not sharp, not loud, but enough to break the rhythm of the moment. That wasn't fabric. That wasn't debris. That was... He opened the door. Cold air rushed in instantly, biting against his face, carrying with it the faintest sound. Soft, fragile, almost lost in the wind. A small, broken whimper. Ethan stepped out onto the pavement, boots meeting asphalt with a dull, grounded sound that echoed more than it should have in the empty night. He didn't slam the door. Didn't rush. Every movement was controlled, measured, like approaching something sacred or dangerous, or both. The dog didn't retreat. It stood its ground, watching him come closer, its eyes catching the headlights in a muted amber glow. Ethan took another step, then another. The world seemed to narrow around them. The highway, the sky, everything fading into the background until there was only this moment, this distance, this quiet understanding forming without words. "Easy," he murmured, his voice instinctively soft now. Not a command. not a warning, a promise. The dog's ears flicked slightly, not back, not forward, just aware. Ethan stopped a few feet away. Close enough now. Close enough to see clearly. What the dog held wasn't just a bundle. It was a baby, wrapped in a thin, worn blanket, edges damp from the cold air, small face barely visible beneath the fold. Too still, too quiet. Ethan's chest tightened, something deep and immediate pulling at him, cutting through years of discipline in a single, undeniable moment. Oh no! The words barely made it out. The dog stepped forward again, just once, closing the final gap, lowering its head slightly, not dropping the child, not letting go, just offering. Trust. Complete and absolute. Ethan didn't hesitate this time. He reached out, hands steady but urgent, and as his fingers brushed the edge of the blanket, he felt it. The faintest warmth. The smallest movement. Life. And in that fragile, trembling second, the entire night shifted. The moment the weight transferred into Ethan's hands, the world seemed to tilt, not violently, but just enough to remind him how fragile everything really was. The baby was lighter than he expected, wrapped in a thin blanket that did little to keep out the cold, the fabric damp and clinging as if it had been through something it could not understand. Ethan cradled the small body instinctively, one hand supporting the head, the other securing the rest, movements guided by memory he did not realize he still carried. The faint warmth he had felt was real, but it was fading, slipping like breath on winter air. Hey, stay with me, he whispered, his voice softer than it had been in years, the kind of tone reserved for things that could break if spoken to too harshly. The baby's face was pale beneath the dim light, lips slightly parted, a weak, uneven breath barely visible against the cold. Then, just as quickly as it had come, a small sound escaped, fragile and thin, but unmistakably alive. Ethan exhaled, a slow release he did not know he had been holding. That is it. That is it, he murmured, adjusting the blanket, pulling it tighter around the tiny form as if he could will warmth back into it. The dog did not move away. It stood close, so close Ethan could feel the steady presence of it beside him, not crowding, not demanding, just there, watching with a focus that felt almost human. Ethan glanced up, meeting those amber eyes again, and this time there was no question in them, no confusion. There was urgency, purpose. You brought him to the road, Ethan said quietly, more to himself than to the animal. You wanted someone to stop. The dog blinked once, slow, deliberate, then turned its head slightly toward the darkness beyond the shoulder of the highway. Not random, directed. Ethan followed the motion, his eyes scanning the edge of the road where the asphalt gave way to dirt, then to scrub and shadow. At first, he saw nothing, just the faint outline of desert brush and the suggestion of uneven ground. Then the dog moved. It took a few steps away from him, then stopped and looked back, waiting, not leaving, waiting. Ethan's pulse shifted again, that same sharp clarity returning, the one that had once guided him through places where hesitation meant everything. He looked down at the baby in his arms, then back at the dog, then out into the darkness. There is more, is there not? He said under his breath. The dog turned again, taking a few more steps, then pausing, its body angled just enough to create a path. It was not running. It was leading. Ethan moved toward his truck quickly, opening the passenger door and gently placing the baby inside, laying it across the seat with care, wrapping the edge of his jacket around the small form to add what little warmth he could. The interior light flickered on, casting a soft glow that made the baby's chest movement easier to see, shallow but steady enough to hold on to. Ethan reached in, adjusting the blanket once more, his hand lingering for a brief second against the tiny shoulder. I will be right back, he said quietly, as if the child could understand. Then he stepped away and shut the door gently, sealing in what warmth remained. The cold hit him harder now, sharper, but he barely noticed. His attention was already shifting back to the dog, to the direction it had chosen. The night seemed darker away from the headlights, the desert swallowing light with an ease that felt unnatural. Ethan moved forward, boots crunching lightly against gravel and dirt, each step deliberate, controlled, his eyes adjusting slowly to the low visibility. The dog stayed ahead, just far enough to guide, just close enough to keep him anchored. The air carried a different scent here, faint but distinct, not just dust and dry earth anymore. There was something else. Metal, oil, subtle but present. Ethan slowed, his senses sharpening as the terrain dipped slightly, the ground uneven beneath his feet. The road noise faded completely behind him, replaced by a deeper silence, the kind that pressed in from all sides. All right, he breathed, scanning the darkness more carefully now. Then he saw it. At first, it was only a shape, a break in the natural line of the land. Something that did not belong. A darker shadow among shadows. He took a few more steps, angling slightly to get a clearer view, and the outline began to form. A vehicle, down a shallow embankment, partially obscured by brush, resting at an angle that was not natural. Not abandoned. Not placed. Stopped. The dog moved closer to it now, its pace quickening just slightly, then slowing again as it reached the edge of the slope, looking back once more to make sure Ethan was still there. Ethan's chest tightened, not from fear, but from recognition. This was the reason. This was why the dog had not moved. He stepped carefully down the incline, gravel shifting under his boots, his balance steady despite the uneven ground. The closer he got, the clearer the details became. The faint reflection of his truck's headlights caught against metal, revealing a door slightly ajar, glass intact but fogged, the shape of the interior dim and quiet. Ethan approached slowly, his movements instinctively cautious, his eyes scanning for any sign of life. The dog stood near the side of the vehicle now, its posture alert but not frantic, as if it had been guarding this place, holding it together until someone came. Ethan reached the door, his hand hovering for a brief moment before he placed it against the cool surface, feeling the stillness through it. "Hello," he called out, his voice low but clear, carried into the quiet space beyond. For a second, there was nothing, just silence. Then, faintly, almost too soft to catch, there was a sound. Not wind, not movement of branches. Something human. A breath. Barely there, but enough. Ethan's heart shifted again, not faster, but deeper, anchoring him to the moment with a clarity that left no room for doubt. "I have got you," he said quietly, more certain now than he had been all night. And behind him, just a few steps away, the dog finally lowered itself to the ground, not in exhaustion, but in quiet relief, as if the weight it had been carrying had finally been shared. The door gave slightly under Ethan's hand, not stuck, not sealed, just resting in place as if whatever had brought it here had ended quietly, without the chaos he might have expected. He pulled it open carefully, slow enough to listen, to feel for any shift in the air, any sign that he was about to step into something unstable. The faint interior light flickered weakly, barely illuminating the cabin, but it was enough. The scent hit him first, not sharp, not alarming, just a mix of fabric, cooled metal, and something human, something that had lingered too long without movement. He leaned in, his eyes adjusting, scanning seat by seat, surface by surface, until they found her. She was slumped slightly toward the center console, one hand resting loosely near her lap, the other angled toward the back seat, as if it had been reaching for something that was no longer there. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, but present, a fragile rhythm that felt like it could disappear if the silence grew too heavy. Ethan stepped closer, one hand bracing against the frame of the car, grounding himself before he reached in. "Hey, can you hear me?" His voice was low, steady, the same tone he had used in places where panic only made things worse. No immediate response, just that faint rise and fall of her chest. He watched it for a second longer, counting the rhythm without realizing it, making sure it was real, not imagined. Then, slowly, her eyelids shifted. Not fully open, just enough to catch a sliver of light, enough to show that somewhere inside, she was still trying to stay present. Ethan exhaled quietly. "That is it, stay with me," he murmured, his hand moving carefully to her shoulder, not shaking, not pulling, just letting her feel that someone was there. Her lips parted slightly, a breath forming into something that almost became a word but never quite reached it. Ethan did not push. He had learned a long time ago that forcing clarity out of someone in this state only took more from them than it gave. Instead, he followed the line of her arm, the direction it had been reaching, his eyes tracing that silent intention. The back seat, empty now, the imprint of something small still visible in the fabric, a slight depression that had not yet settled back into place. Ethan's chest tightened, not from fear, but from understanding. "Your baby," he said softly, more confirmation than question. Her fingers twitched at the word, the smallest reaction, but enough. Enough to anchor everything. Ethan leaned closer, just enough so she could hear him without strain. "He is safe," he said, each word placed carefully, deliberately. "He is in my truck. He is breathing." For a moment, nothing changed. Then her chest rose a little deeper, a fraction more than before, as if something inside her had been holding on for that exact sentence. Her head shifted slightly, not turning fully, just enough to acknowledge the sound, the presence, the meaning behind it. Ethan felt something settle in his own chest, a quiet alignment between what he had found and what needed to happen next. He stepped back just enough to reach for his phone, pulling it from his pocket, the screen lighting up his face in the dim interior. No signal. Not here. Not yet. He glanced back toward the road, where the faint glow of his truck's headlights still cut through the darkness above. Distance. Elevation. That was where he would get it. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his mind already mapping the sequence without panic, without rush, just clarity. "I am going to get help," he said quietly, his eyes returning to hers, making sure she could hear the intention even if the words blurred together. "I am not leaving you. I will be right back." Her breathing remained shallow, but it held. That was enough. Ethan adjusted his stance, careful not to disturb her position, making sure she was stable as she was. He did not try to move her. Not yet. Not without what he needed. He stepped back from the door slowly, letting it rest open just enough to allow air to move, to keep the space from closing in. Behind him, the dog remained where it had settled, its body low to the ground, eyes tracking Ethan's movement with quiet focus. When Ethan turned toward it, their eyes met again, and this time there was something different there. Not urgency. Not anymore. Trust had shifted into something calmer, something that felt like a handoff completed. "You did good," Ethan said quietly, the words simple, but grounded in something real. The dog's ears moved slightly, catching the tone more than the meaning, its gaze steady, unwavering. Ethan nodded once, almost instinctively, then turned and began moving back up the incline, his steps quicker now, but still controlled, each one placed with purpose. The gravel shifted under his boots, the incline steeper than it had felt on the way down, but his focus was already ahead, already on the next step, the next action. The night air felt colder now, sharper against his skin, but it did not matter. As he reached the edge of the road, the headlights from his truck seemed brighter than before, cutting through the darkness like something solid, something dependable. He moved to the driver's side, pulling the door open quickly this time, the interior lights spilling out across the pavement. The baby lay where he had left him, wrapped tighter now in Ethan's jacket, the small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was still fragile, but present. Ethan leaned in, his hand hovering for a moment before gently adjusting the fabric again, making sure. The child was secure. "We are not done yet," he whispered, more to himself than anything else. Then he slid into the driver's seat, turning the key, the engine responding instantly, a low, steady rumble filling the quiet. He reached for his phone again, watching the signal bars as they flickered, searching, catching, then holding just enough to matter. Ethan dialed without hesitation, his eyes lifting once more toward the darkness beyond the road, where the dog remained unseen but not absent, where a life still waited, holding on in the quiet space between breaths. And for the first time that night, the silence did not feel empty. It felt like something was listening. The call connected on the second ring, a thin line of sound cutting through the quiet like something fragile but necessary, and Ethan spoke before the voice on the other end could finish the greeting, his words steady but urgent, each one placed with precision as if clarity itself could hold everything together. "This is Ethan Walker. I am on Highway 89, about 12 miles south of Flagstaff. There is a vehicle off the road, one adult female inside, conscious but weak, and an infant in my truck, breathing but cold. I need medical assistance immediately." The dispatcher's voice came through calm and practiced, asking questions in a rhythm that matched his own, confirming details, repeating location, locking onto coordinates as if building a bridge between where he stood and help already on the way. Ethan answered each one without hesitation, his eyes never leaving the road ahead, the darkness beyond the headlights now carrying weight, meaning, urgency that had not been there before. "Stay on the line with me, sir," the dispatcher said, voice steady, anchoring. "Units are being dispatched. Can you safely remain at the scene?" Ethan glanced toward the passenger seat, toward the small rise and fall beneath his jacket. "Yes," he replied. "I am not going anywhere." He ended the call only when instructed, the silence returning, but no longer empty, now threaded with expectation, with the distant promise of approaching sirens that had not yet reached his ears. Ethan shifted in the seat, turning slightly toward the baby, his hand resting lightly against the blanket, feeling for movement, for warmth, for any sign that the fragile rhythm he had seen moments ago still held. It did, faint but present, a quiet persistence that felt like defiance against the cold pressing in from every direction. "Stay with me," he murmured again, the words softer now, less command, more companionship. Outside, the wind moved low across the open land, carrying dust and slow, unseen currents that brushed against the truck in soft, whispering passes. Ethan's gaze lifted toward the darkness beyond the road, toward the slope where he had left the woman and the dog, and something in him resisted staying still. Waiting had never been easy for him, not when there was something he could still do. He opened the door again, stepping out into the cold, leaving it ajar just enough so he could hear the baby if the silence inside shifted. The headlights stretched long behind him as he moved back toward the edge of the road, his boots finding the same path down the incline, guided now not just by sight, but by memory. The ground felt different this time, not unfamiliar, but heavier, as if each step carried more than just his weight. The vehicle came into view again, its outline clearer now that his eyes had adjusted fully to the darkness, the faint reflection of light catching along its edges. The door remained open as he had left it, the interior still and quiet. And the dog was there, exactly where it had been, lying near the side of the vehicle, head up, eyes tracking his return with that same steady awareness. It did not rise immediately. It did not need to. It simply watched him come closer, as if it had known he would. Ethan approached slowly, lowering himself slightly as he reached the door, his attention returning to the woman inside. Her breathing was still there, uneven but present, a fragile line holding steady in the quiet. "Help is on the way," he said gently, his voice carrying just enough to reach her without demanding anything in return. "You are not alone." Her eyelids moved again, a faint response, a subtle shift that told him she was still hearing, still holding on to whatever thread connected her to this moment. Ethan remained there for a second longer, his presence steady, grounding, then shifted his focus back to the dog. Up close, he could see more now, the details that the darkness had hidden before. The coat, thick but dusted with dirt, the muscles beneath it lean and defined, the posture controlled even in rest. Not a stray, not abandoned. This dog had belonged somewhere, had been trained, had known structure, commands, purpose. And now, somehow, it had carried all of that into this moment, into this choice. "You stayed," Ethan said quietly, almost to himself. The dog's ears moved slightly, catching the tone, the recognition. Ethan extended his hand slowly, not reaching to grab, not forcing contact, just offering it in the space between them. For a brief moment, the dog did not move. Then, slowly, it leaned forward, closing the distance just enough for its nose to brush against his fingers, a single, deliberate acknowledgement. Not submission, not fear, trust. Ethan let out a quiet breath, something in his chest easing in a way he had not expected. He lowered his hand slightly, resting it for a moment against the side of the dog's neck, feeling the warmth there, the steady pulse beneath the fur. Alive, present, real. The dog did not pull away. It remained still, grounded, as if the contact itself was not new, just different. Ethan withdrew his hand after a second, not lingering longer than necessary, and shifted his attention back to the vehicle, scanning once more, confirming that nothing had changed, that everything still held. The silence around them was no longer empty. It carried weight now, anticipation building in the distance, faint at first, then clearer, the low, distant wail of sirens finally reaching through the night air. Ethan lifted his head slightly, listening, measuring the sound, the distance, the time it would take. "They are coming," he said quietly, the words meant for both the woman and the dog, for the space itself that had held them all this long. The dog's posture shifted subtly at the sound, not alarmed, just aware, its ears angling toward the distant noise, processing it, accepting it. Ethan stood, slowly, his body adjusting to the cold again as he turned back toward the incline, toward the truck, toward the baby who still waited in that fragile balance between breath and silence. Each step back felt lighter now, not because the situation had changed, but because it had begun to move, to shift towards something beyond waiting. At the top of the slope, the headlights framed the road again, the truck standing where he had left it, steady and present, a small island of light in the vast darkness. Ethan moved to the passenger side, opening the door and leaning in, his eyes immediately finding the rise and fall beneath the jacket. Still there, still fighting. He adjusted the blanket once more, his hands steady, his movements careful, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself to exhale fully, the tension in his chest releasing just enough to make room for something else. Not relief. Not yet. But something close. And in the distance, the sound of approaching help grew louder, cutting through the night with a clarity that no longer felt uncertain. The sirens grew from a distant thread of sound into something real, something solid, cutting through the open desert with a rising urgency that seemed to push back the silence itself. And Ethan stood beside the open passenger door, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the seat as he watched the small, fragile rise and fall beneath his jacket, counting each breath without realizing it, measuring time not in seconds, but in survival, in the quiet persistence of life refusing to slip away. The red and blue lights appeared first as faint pulses against the horizon, flickering between the low hills like distant lightning, then strengthening, sharpening, until they painted the road in shifting color, washing over the truck, over Ethan's face, over the empty stretch of highway that had felt so still just minutes before. He stepped back slightly, giving space as the first emergency vehicle slowed to a stop behind him, gravel crunching under tires, doors opening almost immediately as paramedics moved with practiced speed, their presence calm but purposeful, voices low, controlled, asking questions that Ethan answered without hesitation, his words clear, direct, grounded in everything he had seen. "Infant in the truck, breathing but cold," he said, stepping aside as one of them moved past him, already reaching for the door, already assessing with a focus that left no room for doubt. Another turned toward him. "And the driver?" Ethan pointed toward the slope, toward the darkness just beyond the reach of the lights. "Down there. Conscious, weak, breathing shallow." The paramedic nodded once, signaling to the others, and within seconds, movement shifted toward the incline, flashlights cutting through the dark, boots finding the same path Ethan had taken, guided now by both urgency and precision. Ethan remained where he was for a moment, watching as the infant was carefully lifted from the seat, wrapped more securely, monitored with gentle efficiency, the small body now surrounded by hands that knew exactly what to do. The baby let out a faint sound, barely more than a breath shaped into something audible, and Ethan felt something in his chest release, not fully, but enough to let air move again. "You did good," one of the paramedics said quietly, not as praise, but as acknowledgement, the kind that carried weight without needing to be spoken twice. Ethan nodded once, his gaze following as they moved the infant toward the ambulance, the interior lights spilling out warm and steady, a contrast to the cold night that had held everything just moments before. But his attention did not stay there long. It shifted back toward the slope, toward the place where it had all started, where the dog still remained. Without thinking, Ethan moved again, his steps quick but controlled as he made his way back down, the flashing lights now reaching farther into the darkness, illuminating the path in fragments, in pieces that came together just enough to guide him. The scene below had changed. The paramedics were already there, one kneeling beside the open door, another preparing equipment, their movements coordinated, quiet, efficient, the kind of work that did not need to be explained to be understood. And beside them, just outside the circle of light, the dog sat, not lying down anymore, sitting, watching, its posture upright, steady, eyes fixed not on the people, but on the woman inside the vehicle, as if its entire world had narrowed to that single point. Ethan slowed as he approached, the sound of his boots softer now, less urgent, as if the moment itself required a different kind of presence. One of the paramedics glanced up briefly, acknowledging him with a nod before returning focus to the woman, checking, adjusting, speaking in low, steady tones that filled the space without breaking it. "She is holding on," the paramedic said quietly, not looking up this time, the words meant for anyone who needed to hear them. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting between the woman and the dog, between the fragile line of life inside the vehicle and the silent guardian just outside it. He stepped closer to the dog, stopping just within reach, not intruding, just sharing the space. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the dog's head turned slightly, its eyes meeting Ethan's once more, and this time, there was something else there. Not urgency, not tension, something quieter, something that felt like completion. Ethan lowered himself slowly, one knee touching the ground, bringing himself closer to the dog's level, his hand resting lightly against his own leg before he reached out again, not with hesitation, but with understanding. "They have her now," he said softly, his voice carrying a calm that matched the moment. "You did not leave her." The dog's ears shifted slightly, catching the tone, the meaning carried not in words but in presence, in the way Ethan stayed there, did not rush away, did not break the connection. Slowly, the dog leaned forward again, pressing its head lightly against Ethan's hand, not seeking comfort, not demanding anything, just acknowledging. Ethan's fingers moved gently along the side of its neck, feeling the warmth, the steady pulse, the reality of it. Alive. Here. Still. The paramedics continued their work, careful, deliberate, lifting the woman onto a stretcher, securing her with movements that were firm but gentle, their voices low as they coordinated each step. As they began to move her up the incline, the dog stood, its body tensing slightly, not in fear, but in readiness, watching every movement with unwavering focus. Ethan rose with it, his hand falling back to his side as he turned to follow, staying just behind, just close enough to feel the shift in the air, the transition from waiting to action, from uncertainty to something steadier. At the top of the slope, the lights were brighter, the sounds clearer, the presence of help no longer distant but immediate, surrounding, real. The stretcher was guided into the ambulance, the doors opening wide, then closing with a finality that felt like a threshold being crossed. The baby was already inside, small and wrapped, monitored by hands that moved with quiet confidence. Ethan stood just outside for a moment, his eyes taking it all in, the scene that had unfolded from a single still figure in the road, now settling into something else entirely. And beside him, the dog remained, not stepping forward, not climbing in, just standing there, watching as the doors closed, as the lights shifted, as the world moved on from the place it had held for so long. Ethan glanced down at it once more, his gaze steady, his voice low. "You can rest now." The dog did not move immediately. It simply stood there, eyes following the ambulance as the engine turned over, as the lights intensified, as the vehicle began to pull away, carrying with it the lives it had guarded through the night. And only then, slowly, did the dog lower itself to the ground, not in exhaustion, but in something deeper, something quieter, as if the purpose it had carried had finally found its place. The ambulance disappeared into the distance with a fading pulse of red and blue, its sound stretching thin across the desert until it became just another memory carried by the wind. And for a moment the world settled into something quieter, something softer, as if the night itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Ethan stood there on the side of the road, the cold no longer biting as sharply, his hands resting loosely at his sides, his eyes fixed on the empty stretch where the lights had vanished. The highway returned to its silence, vast and open, but it did not feel the same as before. Something had shifted. Something had been placed back where it belonged. He turned slowly, his gaze lowering to the dog beside him. It had not moved far. It lay a few feet away, its body relaxed now, not tense, not alert, just still in a way that felt earned rather than uncertain. The rise and fall of its chest was steady, calm, as if the urgency that had driven it through the night had finally found its end. Ethan stepped closer, his boots soft against the asphalt, and crouched down again, this time without hesitation, without caution, just presence. "It is over," he said quietly, his voice carrying no weight of command, only acknowledgement. The dog lifted its head slightly, its eyes finding his again, and there was no question in them now, no searching, no asking. Just a quiet recognition that passed between them, something understood without explanation. Ethan reached out, resting his hand gently against the side of the dog's neck, his fingers brushing through the thick fur, feeling the warmth, the life that had carried so much more than it should have had to. The dog did not pull away. It leaned subtly into the contact, not seeking, not clinging, just accepting. The wind moved low across the open land again, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and distance. But now there was something else beneath it, something lighter, something that did not feel like absence anymore. Ethan sat there for a moment longer, the silence no longer empty, no longer something to fill, but something to share. His gaze drifted briefly toward his truck, parked just ahead, its engine still running softly, the interior light faintly glowing through the window. The place where the baby had been felt different now, not because it was empty, but because it had been part of something that mattered. He looked back at the dog, his expression steady, thoughtful. "You do not have a collar," he said softly, more to himself than anything else, his eyes scanning the neck, the shoulders, the small details that told a story without words. There were faint marks where one might have been once, a slight indentation in the fur, a memory of something that used to be there. Not lost, not forgotten, just gone. "You belong to someone," Ethan added quietly. The dog's ears shifted slightly at the tone, not the words, as if it understood the weight behind them even if it did not need the meaning. Ethan exhaled slowly, his hand still resting against the animal, grounding himself in the moment, in the reality of what had just happened. He had driven down an empty road, expecting nothing, and found something that had changed the shape of the night entirely. He had seen this before, in different forms, in different places, where moments arrived without warning and asked everything from you all at once. But this felt different. There had been no command, no mission, no plan. Just a choice. A dog in the road that refused to move. And everything that followed. Ethan shifted slightly, easing himself up from the ground, his hand sliding away gently as he stood. The dog remained where it was for a second, then slowly rose as well, its movement unhurried, its posture calm, as if it was simply mirroring him, staying aligned with whatever came next. Ethan glanced down the road once more, then back toward his truck, then finally back at the dog. "Come on," he said quietly, his voice low but certain. "Let us get out of the cold." He turned and began walking toward the truck, not checking if the dog followed, not needing to. The sound of soft paws on asphalt came a moment later, steady, measured, falling into step beside him without hesitation. They reached the truck together, the engine still humming, a small pocket of warmth waiting inside. Ethan opened the passenger door first, the interior light spilling out across the ground, then paused, looking down at the dog. For a brief second, neither moved. Then the dog stepped forward, placing its front paws onto the edge of the seat, pulling itself up with a smooth, controlled motion, settling inside without needing direction. Ethan allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile, not wide, not obvious, just enough to register. He closed the door gently, then moved around to the driver's side, climbing in and shutting it behind him, sealing the two of them inside the quiet, contained space. The warmth began to build almost immediately, the contrast to the cold outside soft but noticeable. Ethan rested his hands on the steering wheel for a moment, not turning the vehicle into motion yet, just sitting, letting the moment settle, letting everything that had just happened find its place within him. He glanced sideways at the dog, now lying across the seat, its head resting low, eyes half closed but still aware, still present. "You are not going back out there," Ethan said quietly, his voice calm, matter of fact, not a question, not a negotiation. The dog did not respond with movement, but its breathing remained steady, its presence unchanged, as if the decision had already been made long before the words were spoken. Ethan nodded once, almost to himself, then shifted the truck into gear. The headlights stretched forward again, illuminating the road ahead, the same road that had brought him here, but now carrying something entirely different with it. As the truck began to move, slow at first, then steady, the night opened up again, wide and quiet, but no longer empty. And beside him, the dog remained, not as a stranger, not as something found, but as something that had chosen to stay. The road stretched ahead in long, silent lines, the headlights carving a steady path through the darkness as Ethan drove without urgency, but without hesitation, the engine humming low beneath him like something dependable, something constant in a night that had already asked more than it should have. The dog lay beside him, still and quiet, its body stretched across the passenger seat with a kind of calm that did not come from exhaustion alone, but from something deeper, something settled. Its eyes were not fully closed. They tracked the passing light in slow, subtle movements, as if it was still watching, still measuring the world even in rest. Ethan kept his hands steady on the wheel, his posture relaxed but attentive, the way it always was, the way it had been trained to be long before nights like this ever happened. He did not turn on the radio. He did not fill the silence. There was no need. The quiet inside the truck felt different now, not empty, not heavy, just present, shared. After a few miles, the faint glow of a roadside gas station appeared ahead, a small pocket of light in the open dark, its fluorescent hum visible even from a distance, casting pale yellow onto the cracked pavement and the empty pumps. Ethan slowed as he approached, signaling out of habit even though there was no one else on the road, and pulled in smoothly, the tires rolling over gravel and worn concrete until the truck came to a gentle stop. He left the engine running for a moment, then shifted into park and turned slightly in his seat, his eyes moving to the dog. "We are going to take a minute," he said quietly, his voice low and even, not expecting a response, just marking the moment. The dog's ears moved slightly, catching the tone, the rhythm, and it lifted its head just enough to acknowledge him before settling again. Ethan reached down and grabbed a spare blanket from behind the seat, the fabric worn but clean, something he kept out of habit more than intention, and draped it gently over the dog's back, tucking it in slightly along its side. The dog did not resist. It did not shift away. It simply accepted the warmth, its breathing steady, its presence grounded. Ethan stepped out of the truck, the cold air meeting him again, sharper now that the engine heat was behind him, and moved toward the small building attached to the pumps. The door chimed softly as he entered, the interior lit in a flat, steady glow, shelves lined with quiet, ordinary things that felt almost out of place after everything that had just happened. A clerk stood behind the counter, half awake, half aware, offering a brief nod that Ethan returned without stopping. He moved through the aisles quickly, selecting a bottle of water, a small container of plain food, something simple, something easy, then stepped back to the counter, placing the items down with a quiet certainty. The exchange was brief, minimal, just enough words to complete what needed to be done. When he stepped back outside, the air felt colder again, but it no longer cut as deeply. Ethan returned to the truck, opening the passenger door carefully, the interior lights spilling out once more. The dog lifted its head. Again, watching him with that same steady gaze, not questioning, not uncertain, just aware. Ethan crouched slightly, unscrewing the bottle, pouring a small amount of water into the lid, then holding it out slowly. "Easy," he murmured. The dog leaned forward, not rushing, not lunging, just lowering its head to drink, slow and controlled, each movement deliberate. Ethan watched closely, making sure it was steady, making sure it was real. After a moment, he set the lid aside and opened the food container, offering a small portion the same way, patient, measured. The dog accepted it, eating slowly, not with hunger alone, but with awareness, as if it understood that this was not just food, but something else being given, something shared. Ethan nodded faintly, more to himself than anything else, then stood and closed the door gently, moving back around to the driver's side. He climbed in, letting the door shut with a soft, contained sound, sealing them inside once more. The warmth returned gradually, the quiet settling again, but now it carried something new. Not just relief, not just calm, something closer to belonging. Ethan rested his hands on the wheel again, his eyes forward, but his attention partially turned inward, to the shape of the night, to the way it had unfolded, to the choices that had been made without words. He had not planned any of it. He had not expected it. And yet, here they were. He glanced sideways once more, his gaze landing on the dog, now resting again beneath the blanket, its breathing even, its presence no longer something passing through his life, but something that had entered it without asking. Ethan's jaw shifted slightly, a quiet thought forming without needing to be spoken. "You are not just passing through," he said softly, the words barely above a whisper. The dog's ear flicked once at the sound, a small acknowledgement that felt more like understanding than reaction. Ethan exhaled slowly, then shifted the truck back into drive, easing forward out of the gas station, the tires rolling smoothly back onto the open road. The darkness welcomed them again, but it was no longer the same darkness that had been there before. It felt different now, lighter in a way that did not come from the absence of trouble, but from the presence of something that had chosen to stay. The headlights stretched forward, illuminating the path ahead, mile by mile, steady and sure. And inside the truck, there were no longer two separate journeys moving through the night. There was just one. The miles passed quietly beneath the tires, each one measured not by distance alone, but by the steady rhythm of the engine and the calm breathing beside him. And somewhere between the fading darkness and the first hint of dawn, the sky began to soften at the edges, a faint line of pale blue stretching low across the horizon like a promise that had been waiting its turn. Ethan did not rush toward it. He let the road come to him, let the night give way at its own pace, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes forward but aware of everything that moved around him, within him. The dog shifted slightly under the blanket, not restless, just adjusting, its head lifting for a moment as if sensing the change in the air before settling again, its gaze drifting toward the windshield where the first light began to take shape. There was something in that movement that felt familiar, something instinctive, like both of them recognized that this was not just the end of a night, but the beginning of something else entirely. After another stretch of open road, a sign appeared ahead, small at first, then clearer as the headlights reached it, marking the turnoff toward a regional hospital just a few miles east. Ethan slowed, signaling again out of habit, and guided the truck onto the exit ramp, the pavement smoother here, the edges lined with low lights that glowed softly in the early morning dim. The transition from open highway to something more structured felt subtle but real, like stepping from wilderness into a place where things had names, where help had walls and doors, and people waiting inside them. The hospital came into view gradually, its building low and wide, windows lit from within, casting a steady, reassuring glow that stood in quiet contrast to the emptiness of the road behind him. Ethan pulled into the parking lot slowly, choosing a space near the entrance without overthinking it, the truck rolling to a stop with the same controlled ease that had carried him through the night. For a moment, he did not move. He sat there, the engine idling softly, the early light brushing against the edges of the windshield, the world around him shifting from dark to something clearer, something that no longer needed headlights to exist. He glanced sideways at the dog, its eyes now open, watching him with that same steady awareness that had not left since the first moment they met. "We are going inside," Ethan said quietly, his voice calm, not asking, not commanding, just stating what came next. The dog's ears moved slightly, its head lifting a little higher, as if it understood the change in direction, the shift in purpose. Ethan turned off the engine, the sudden quiet settling around them in a way that felt different now, not empty, just still. He stepped out of the truck, the air cooler here but softer, carrying the faint scent of morning, clean and distant. Moving around to the passenger side, he opened the door carefully, giving the dog space, time, the choice to move on its own. For a brief second, it remained still, its gaze moving from Ethan to the building, to the open space between them, then back again. Then, without hesitation, it stepped down onto the pavement, its movement smooth, controlled, as if it had already decided this long before the door opened. Ethan nodded faintly, not surprised, just acknowledging. Together, they walked toward the entrance, the automatic doors sliding open with a soft mechanical hum, releasing a wave of warm, controlled air that carried with it the scent of antiseptic and quiet urgency, the unmistakable atmosphere of a place where people came to be held between uncertainty and hope. Inside, the lighting was steady, bright but not harsh, the floor clean, the sounds low and contained, Voices kept soft out of respect for everything that passed through these walls. A nurse at the front desk looked up as they entered, her expression shifting from routine attention to something more focused as she took in the sight of Ethan, of the dog at his side, of the quiet weight they carried between them. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice gentle but direct. Ethan stepped forward, his posture relaxed but grounded, his words clear. "There was an accident on Highway 89, he said. "A woman and an infant were brought in not long ago." The nurse's expression changed subtly, recognition passing through her eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "They arrived about 15 minutes ago. They are being treated now." Ethan exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to reach deeper than the ones before it. Not relief exactly, but something close enough to stand in its place. "Are they?" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The nurse held his gaze for a moment, then offered a small, steady nod. "They are stable," she said. "Both of them." The words settled in the space between them, simple, direct, carrying more weight than anything else that had been said all night. Ethan lowered his gaze briefly, absorbing it, letting it find its place. Beside him, the dog remained still, its posture calm, its presence quiet but aware, as if it, too, understood something had shifted, something had resolved. Ethan glanced down at it, his expression softening just slightly, then looked back at the nurse. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words carrying a sincerity that did not need emphasis. The nurse nodded again, her eyes flicking briefly to the dog, then back to Ethan, something unspoken passing through her expression, something that did not need to be explained. Ethan stepped back slightly, moving away from the desk, giving space, letting the moment settle without pressing further. He did not rush toward the treatment area. He did not need to see more right now. Knowing was enough. Standing there, just inside the entrance, he let the quiet of the place wrap around him, the steady hum of the building, the soft movement of people who knew what they were doing, who carried things forward without needing to be asked. And beside him, the dog remained, not restless, not uncertain, just present, as if it had followed the story to its natural end and was waiting, calmly, for whatever came next. Time moved differently inside the hospital. Slower but heavier, as if each second carried more meaning than it did out on the road, and Ethan found himself standing near a row of empty chairs along the wall, his hands resting loosely at his sides while the quiet rhythm of the place settled around him, the low hum of distant machines, the soft murmur of voices, the faint echo of footsteps moving with purpose but without urgency. The dog remained beside him, not pacing, not restless, just present, its body aligned with his in a way that felt intentional, as if it understood that this place required stillness, required patience. Ethan glanced down at it briefly, his gaze steady, then lifted again toward the hallway where the nurse had indicated the treatment rooms were located. He did not move toward them. Not yet. He had learned long ago that there were moments when stepping forward too quickly disrupted something fragile, something still taking shape. So he waited. Minutes passed, though they did not feel like minutes, more like small stretches of time that folded into each other without clear edges, and then a figure appeared at the end of the hallway, moving toward him with a measured pace. A doctor, mid-40s, composed, eyes focused but not hurried. He stopped a few feet away, offering a brief nod, the kind that acknowledged both presence and purpose. "You are the one who brought them in?" he asked, his voice calm, direct. Ethan nodded once. "Yes, sir." The doctor studied him for a moment, not evaluating, not questioning, just taking in what stood before him. Then his gaze shifted briefly to the dog at Ethan's side, then back again. "They are stable," he said, echoing what the nurse had already told him, but now with a weight that felt more grounded, more certain. The infant was cold, but responded quickly to warming. Breathing is steady. The mother is conscious now, weak, but alert. Ethan exhaled slowly, his shoulders easing just slightly, not fully, but enough to register the difference. "Can I see her?" he asked, his tone respectful, not demanding. The doctor hesitated for just a second, then nodded. Briefly, he said, "She asked about her child. I think that would help." Ethan inclined his head, once in acknowledgement, then followed as the doctor turned and led the way down the hallway, the dog rising smoothly and falling in a step beside him without needing to be called. The corridor felt narrower than the open spaces outside, the light brighter, the air more controlled, each step carrying a quiet significance that did not need to be spoken. They stopped outside a partially open door, the doctor pausing, then stepping aside. "She is in here," he said softly. Ethan nodded once more, then stepped forward, pushing the door open just enough to enter. The room was simple, clean, the lights soft but steady, and in the bed near the center, the woman lay propped slightly upright, her face pale but no longer distant, her eyes open, searching the space as if trying to reconnect with everything she had nearly lost. When she saw Ethan, she blinked once, her gaze focusing, trying to place him within the fragments of memory that had carried her here. Ethan stopped a few feet from the bed, not too close, not imposing, just present. "You are safe," he said quietly, his voice carrying the same calm that had guided him through the night. Her lips parted slightly, her breath shallow but more controlled now, and for a moment she simply looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something she could hold on to. "My baby," she whispered, the words fragile, barely formed but unmistakable. Ethan nodded gently. "He is alive," he said, each word clear, deliberate. "He is being cared for. He is strong." The change in her expression was subtle but immediate, something loosening in her eyes, something that had been held tight finally releasing just enough to let her breathe differently. Her gaze shifted slightly, then back again, and then, as if remembering something deeper, something beyond the moment, she asked, "The dog?" Ethan glanced briefly toward the doorway, where the German shepherd now stood just inside the threshold, quiet, still, watching. "He is here," Ethan said softly. The woman's eyes moved slowly toward the door, finding the dog, and for a second, everything in the room seemed to pause. The dog did not move forward. It did not bark or step closer. It simply stood there, its posture steady, its presence calm, as if it understood that this moment did not belong to it, but it was still part of it. A faint expression passed over the woman's face, something between relief and disbelief, something that did not need words to exist. "He stayed," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Ethan nodded once. "He did more than that," he said quietly. The room fell into a gentle silence, not empty, not heavy, just full of things that did not need to be spoken aloud. Ethan remained where he was for a moment longer, giving her time, giving the moment space to settle into something real, something lasting. Then he stepped back slightly, not turning away abruptly, just easing out of the center of it, allowing what needed to remain to remain. As he reached the doorway, he paused briefly, his gaze dropping once more to the dog, then lifting again toward the woman. No words this time. None were needed. He stepped into the hallway, the door remaining partially open behind him, the quiet of the room still present even as he moved away from it. And beside him, the dog followed, not because it was told to, but because it had already chosen where it belonged. The hallway felt quieter as Ethan stepped away from the room, not because the sounds had disappeared, but because something inside him had shifted, settling into a place that did not need constant movement anymore. And he slowed his pace without realizing it, his steps measured, grounded, as if the urgency that had carried him through the night had finally reached its edge. The dog remained beside him, matching that slower rhythm effortlessly, its presence no longer sharp with purpose, but steady with something deeper, something that felt like completion. They moved back toward the waiting area, the same row of chairs, the same soft lighting, but it no longer felt like a place of uncertainty. It felt like a place where things had already begun to heal. Ethan stopped near the window, the early morning light now stronger, filtering in with a pale gold tone that softened the edges of everything it touched. Outside, the world had fully shifted into day, the sky clear, the horizon no longer holding secrets. He rested one hand lightly against the back of a chair, not sitting, just anchoring himself for a moment, his gaze drifting outward before returning inward again. The dog lowered itself to the floor beside him, its body relaxed, head resting near its paws, but its eyes remained open, aware, following the quiet movement of people passing through the space. Ethan glanced down at it, studying it more closely now that there was time to see, to understand. The coat, though marked by dust, carried a natural sheen beneath it. The posture, even in rest, was disciplined, aligned. This was not a dog that had learned survival on its own. This was a dog that had been taught, trained, trusted, and somewhere along the way, it had lost the place where it belonged. Ethan's gaze lingered on the faint indentation around its neck again, the ghost of a collar that was no longer there, and something in his chest tightened slightly, not with pain, but with recognition. Loss did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it just left a space behind. He exhaled slowly, then shifted his stance, turning slightly so that he faced the dog more directly. "You had someone," he said quietly, his voice low, thoughtful. The dog's ears moved subtly, catching the tone, the weight behind the words. Ethan did not expect an answer. He did not need one. The truth of it was already there, written in the way the dog carried itself, in the way it had chosen to act when it mattered. A nurse passed by, glancing briefly at them, her expression softening just slightly at the sight, then continuing on without interruption. Time moved again, steady, unhurried, and Ethan remained where he was, not waiting for anything specific, just allowing the moment to exist without pushing it forward. After a while, the same doctor returned, his steps calm, his presence unchanged, but there was something lighter in his expression now, something that had not been there before. He stopped a few feet away, offering a small nod. "She is asking about you," he said simply. Ethan lifted his gaze, meeting the doctor's eyes. "About me?" he asked quietly. The doctor nodded once. "And the dog," he added. Ethan glanced down briefly, then back up again. "Is she stable?" he asked. "Yes," the doctor replied. "Stronger than when she arrived." Ethan let that settle, then gave a slight nod of his own. "All right," he said. He did not move immediately. He took a breath first, steady and controlled, then turned toward the hallway again, the dog rising smoothly beside him, ready without needing instruction. They walked back together, the same corridor, the same light, but now there was a different feeling in the air, something less fragile, more certain. When they reached the room, the door was slightly more open than before, as if the space inside no longer needed to be protected from interruption. Ethan stepped in quietly, the dog remaining just behind him at first, its presence respectful, aware. The woman was sitting a little more upright now, supported by pillows, her face still pale but clearer, her eyes more focused, more present. When she saw Ethan, she gave a faint, tired smile, the kind that carried gratitude without needing to say it outright. "You came back," she said softly. Ethan inclined his head slightly. "I said I would," he replied, his tone simple, steady. Her gaze shifted past him then, toward the doorway, and the moment she saw the dog, something in her expression changed again, something deeper, something that reached beyond the immediate relief of survival. "There you are," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The dog stepped forward slowly this time, not rushing, not bounding, just closing the distance with calm certainty until it stood near the side of the bed. It did not jump up. It did not intrude. It simply stood there, close enough to be felt, present enough to be known. The woman lifted her hand slightly, weak but intentional, and after a brief pause, the dog leaned forward just enough for her fingers to rest against its head, the contact gentle, almost reverent. No words passed between them in that moment. None were needed. Ethan stood a few feet away, watching quietly, his hands at his sides, his posture relaxed but attentive, allowing the space to belong to them. After a moment, the woman's gaze lifted back to Ethan, her eyes holding his with a quiet intensity. "He would not leave me," she said softly. Ethan nodded once. "He would not," he replied. She swallowed slightly, her expression shifting as if trying to find the right way to hold everything that had happened. "His name is Rex," she said after a moment, the words carrying something more than just information. Ethan's gaze flickered briefly to the dog, then back to her. "Rex," he repeated quietly, as if placing the name where it belonged. The dog's ears moved subtly at the sound, its attention sharpening just slightly, acknowledging something familiar, something remembered. The woman exhaled slowly, her hand still resting against the dog's head. "I thought I lost him," she whispered. Ethan did not respond immediately. He did not need to fill the silence. After a moment, he simply said, "He found you." And in the quiet that followed, that was enough. The room held a quiet that felt earned, not fragile anymore, but steady, like something that had been broken and carefully placed back together piece by piece. And Ethan remained where he was, Watching the woman's hand rest against Rex's head, the small movement of her fingers slow but intentional, as if she was reminding herself that what she touched was real, that what she had feared losing had not been taken from her after all. Rex did not move away. He stood there with a stillness that carried memory, his eyes soft but alert, his posture balanced between presence and restraint, as if he understood that this moment belonged to her more than to him. The morning light filtered in through the window now, warmer, fuller, brushing against the edges of the bed, catching in the strands of her hair, in the lines of her face that had shifted from strain into something quieter, something closer to peace. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight in his chest settling into something he could carry without effort now, and he took a small step back, not leaving, just allowing the space between them to widen enough for the moment to breathe on its own. The woman's gaze remained on Rex for a while longer, then slowly lifted back to Ethan, her eyes clearer now, more grounded, as if the pieces of memory that had been scattered were beginning to return to their places. "He disappeared 3 weeks ago," she said softly, her voice still thin but steady enough to hold meaning. "We were out near the trail behind our house. Something startled him. He ran. I thought." She stopped there, her breath catching slightly, not from pain, but from the weight of what she had believed. Ethan did not interrupt. He did not fill the silence. He simply listened, his posture still, his presence steady. "I looked for him," she continued after a moment, her hand still resting against Rex's head, her fingers now moving a little more easily. "Every day? I called, I drove, I put up signs, but nothing." Her eyes lowered briefly, then lifted again, stronger this time. "And then last night," her voice softened, not fading, just shifting. "I remember the road. I remember losing control for a second, just a second, and then everything went quiet." Ethan nodded once, not confirming, not correcting, just acknowledging that what she remembered was enough. "He must have found you," he said quietly. "After." The woman's gaze returned to Rex, her expression thoughtful, almost disbelieving. "He carried my baby," she whispered, the words slow, as if saying them made them more real. Ethan did not respond immediately. He let the truth of that settle in the room, in the air, in the space between them. Rex's ears flicked slightly at the sound of her voice, but he remained still, grounded, as if the weight of what he had done did not belong to him anymore, as if it had already been given away. The woman swallowed gently, her hand pressing just a fraction more firmly against his head. "He knew," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. "He knew what to do." Ethan's gaze shifted briefly to Rex, then back to her. "Some do," he said quietly. The simplicity of it carried more weight than anything else could have. The woman's eyes softened again, not with sadness this time, but with something deeper, something that felt like gratitude settling into place. "What is your name?" she asked after a moment, her attention returning fully to Ethan. "Ethan," he replied. "Ethan Walker." She nodded slowly, as if committing it to memory. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. Ethan inclined his head slightly, the acknowledgement quiet, not deflecting, not absorbing, just accepting what was given without changing it. "You are welcome," he said simply. There was no need for more. The room remained still for a moment longer, the kind of stillness that did not ask for anything else, that allowed everything to exist as it was. Then a soft sound came from the hallway, a nurse stepping in briefly, checking, adjusting, offering a quiet word before stepping back out again. The routine of care continuing around them without disrupting the moment that had formed. Ethan glanced once more at Rex, then at the woman, his posture shifting slightly, the subtle indication that he would not remain much longer. "They're going to take care of you now," he said gently. "Both of you." The woman nodded, her hand still resting against Rex, her fingers now moving with a little more strength. "Will he stay?" she asked, her eyes lifting to meet Ethan's. Ethan paused for a second, his gaze moving to Rex, then back again. "That depends on you," he said quietly. The woman's expression softened, something like a faint smile forming at the edge of it. "Then he stays," she said. Rex did not move at the words, but something in his posture shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, as if a line had been drawn and he had chosen where to stand within it. Ethan nodded once more, the decision accepted without question. He stepped back toward the doorway, giving them space again, allowing the bond that had carried them through the night to settle into something lasting, something that no longer needed urgency to exist. At the threshold, he paused, his gaze lingering for just a moment longer on the scene before him. The woman, the dog, the quiet light of morning holding them both. Then he turned, stepping into the hallway, the door remaining open behind him, the sound of the room still present even as he moved away. And as he walked back toward the entrance, the weight of the night no longer followed him. It had stayed where it belonged. The hallway felt longer this time as Ethan walked back toward the entrance, not because the distance had changed, but because something inside him had slowed, no longer pushed forward by urgency or necessity, but guided by something quieter, something that did not rush to the next moment. The light from the windows had grown stronger now, filling the space with a soft morning clarity that revealed everything as it was, without shadow, without distortion. People moved around him with calm purpose, nurses carrying charts, a doctor speaking in low tones to a family near the far wall, footsteps steady, measured, each one part of a rhythm that continued whether he was there or not. And for the first time since the night began, Ethan felt separate from it, not isolated, not removed, but no longer at the center of it. He had done what needed to be done. The rest no longer belonged to him. He reached the waiting area again, pausing near the same row of chairs, his hand brushing lightly against the back of one as if to confirm he was still grounded, still present. The air felt warmer now, the kind of warmth that did not come from heat alone, but from resolution, from things finding their place. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders easing in a way that did not require thought. His gaze drifted toward the entrance doors, the glass reflecting the morning outside, the sky now fully awake, pale blue stretching wide and open beyond the parking lot. For a moment, he simply stood there, allowing the quiet to settle around him, allowing the night to fade without needing to hold on to it. Behind him, the soft sound of footsteps approached, measured and familiar, and he turned slightly, already knowing who it would be. Rex stood a few feet away, just outside the hallway, not inside the room anymore, not at the bed, but here, in the space between where everything had happened and where everything would continue. Ethan's brow shifted slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition of something unexpected. "You should be in there," he said quietly, his voice calm, almost a statement rather than a question. Rex did not move. He stood where he was, posture steady, eyes fixed on Ethan, not pleading, not uncertain, just present. There was no tension in him, no urgency, just a quiet decision that had already been made. Ethan studied him for a moment, his gaze moving over the familiar details again, the strength in the frame, the intelligence behind the eyes, the calm that came from knowing exactly what had been done and what no longer needed to be done. "She said you could stay," Ethan added softly, as if offering the choice again, as if confirming what had already been given. Rex's ears flicked slightly, acknowledging the sound, but he did not turn back toward the hallway. He remained where he was, with Ethan. The silence between them stretched for a second, not uncomfortable, not uncertain, just full of understanding that did not need to be spoken. Ethan exhaled quietly, something in his chest shifting, not heavy, not light, just real. "You already decided," he said under his breath. Rex's posture softened just slightly, not moving forward, not stepping back, just holding his ground in a way that felt intentional. Ethan glanced once more toward the hallway, toward the room where the woman now rested, where the child breathed safely under careful watch, where the story that had brought them all together had found its resolution. Everything that needed to be protected was protected. Everything that needed to be returned had been returned. He looked back at Rex, his expression steady, thoughtful, not surprised anymore. "You made sure they were safe," he said quietly. "That was your job." Rex's gaze did not waver. Ethan let the words settle, then nodded once, a small, deliberate motion that carried acceptance more than agreement. He turned toward the entrance, taking a step, then another, not checking if Rex would follow, not needing to. The automatic doors slid open with a soft sound, the morning air greeting him again, cool but gentle, carrying the scent of something new, something beginning. Ethan stepped outside, the light brighter now, clearer, the world fully awake, and for a moment, he paused on the threshold, one foot inside, one foot out, as if marking the place where the night had ended and something else had begun. Behind him, there was a brief silence, then the soft, steady sound of pause. Against tile, then against pavement. Ethan did not turn immediately. He did not need to. He already knew. When he finally glanced over his shoulder, Rex was there, just a step behind, not crowding, not leading, just present in the same quiet way he had been since the road. Ethan's jaw shifted slightly, the smallest trace of something close to a smile forming, not broad, not obvious, just enough to exist. "All right," he said softly, the word carrying more meaning than it should have for something so simple. He walked toward the truck, the gravel crunching lightly beneath his boots, the sunlight catching along the edges of the vehicle, turning it from something that had cut through the night into something that now belonged to the day. Rex moved beside him, his pace even, his presence steady, not looking back, not hesitating, as if the choice had been made long before they reached this point. Ethan reached the driver's door, his hand resting briefly against the handle before he pulled it open, then paused, glancing down at Rex one more time. "This is not your road anymore," he said quietly. Rex looked up at him, his eyes clear, calm, holding that same depth that had stopped a truck in the middle of the night. There was no resistance, no doubt. Ethan nodded once, then opened the passenger door as well, giving him space, giving him the option again, even though he already knew the answer. Rex stepped up without hesitation, moving into the seat with the same controlled ease, settling into the space as if it had been waiting for him all along. Ethan closed the door gently, then moved around to his side, climbing in and shutting it behind him, the interior wrapping around them once more, familiar now, not temporary. He rested his hands on the wheel for a moment, looking forward, then sideways, then forward again. The road ahead was open, wide, clear. And this time, it was not empty. The engine turned over with a low, steady hum. And for a moment Ethan did not move, his hands resting on the wheel, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, while the morning lights stretched across the dashboard in quiet lines, illuminating the space in a way that felt almost unfamiliar after the long hours of darkness. Rex lay beside him, settled into the seat, his body relaxed but not distant, his eyes half open, watching the world without needing to follow every movement, as if he had already seen enough for one night, and was now content to simply exist within the quiet that followed. Ethan exhaled slowly, his breath steady, the kind of breath that did not come from tension anymore, but from something that had been released, something that no longer needed to be held. He shifted the truck into gear, easing forward out of the parking space, the tires rolling softly over the gravel, then onto the smooth pavement of the road beyond. The hospital receded behind them, its structure solid and still, holding within it the lives that had been carried there through uncertainty and returned to something steadier, something that would continue without him. Ethan did not look back. He did not need to. Some things were meant to stay where they had been placed. The road opened ahead, wide and clear under the morning sky, the horizon no longer hidden, the distance no longer uncertain. Traffic was beginning to move now, a few cars passing in the opposite direction, their presence ordinary, unremarkable, a reminder that the world continued in ways that did not pause for what had happened in the quiet hours before dawn. Ethan guided the truck into the flow without effort, his movements smooth, controlled, the rhythm of driving returning to him in a way that felt both familiar and new at the same time. Beside him, Rex shifted slightly, adjusting his position, then settled again, his head resting lower now, his breathing slow, even, the tension that had once defined his posture now replaced with something softer, something that did not need to prove itself anymore. Ethan glanced sideways at him briefly, his gaze steady, thoughtful, then returned to the road. "You carried him," he said quietly, his voice low, not expecting a response, not needing one. The words were not for explanation. They were for acknowledgement. Rex's ear flicked slightly at the sound, a small movement, subtle but present, as if he recognized the tone more than the meaning. Ethan nodded faintly too. Himself, his fingers tightening just slightly around the wheel before relaxing again. Miles passed beneath them, the landscape shifting gradually from open desert into scattered trees, from empty stretches into signs of small towns waking up, gas stations opening, diners flickering to life with early morning customers, the ordinary details of a day beginning without knowing what had come before it. And through it all, the truck moved steadily forward, carrying within it something that did not belong to the road alone. After some time, Ethan turned onto a quieter route, a road that curved gently through a line of pines, the air cooler here, the light filtering through branches in soft patterns that moved across the windshield like something alive. He slowed slightly, not out of necessity, but because the place invited it, because the moment allowed it. Rex lifted his head again, his gaze shifting toward the window, taking in the change, the scent of trees, the difference in air, his posture adjusting not with tension, but with quiet awareness. Ethan followed the curve of the road until a small clearing opened on the right, a place where the ground leveled out and a narrow path led deeper into the trees, untouched, still, the kind of place that did not ask for anything except presence. He eased the truck to a stop, the engine idling for a moment before he turned it off, letting the silence return in its natural form, without interruption, without the hum that had carried them this far. He did not move immediately. He sat there, his hands resting loosely, his gaze forward, allowing the quiet to settle fully around him, to replace the noise of everything that had come before. Then he turned slightly, looking at Rex. The dog met his gaze, calm, steady, not searching, not uncertain, just present in a way that felt complete. Ethan opened the door and stepped out, the cool air meeting him again, softer now, carrying the scent of pine and earth, something grounded, something real. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door, stepping back to give Rex space. For a moment, the dog remained where he was, his eyes moving from Ethan to the open space beyond, to the path leading into the trees. Then, slowly, he stepped down, his paws touching the ground with a quiet certainty, his body stretching slightly as he adjusted to the new place. Ethan closed the door gently and stood there, watching, not directing, not guiding, just allowing. Rex took a few steps forward, then paused, looking back once, not as a question, not as hesitation, but as acknowledgement. Ethan nodded once, a small, deliberate motion. "You are not lost anymore," he said quietly. Rex held his gaze for a second longer, then turned, moving toward the path, his steps steady, unhurried, carrying with them the same purpose that had brought him into the road, but now without urgency, without weight. Ethan watched him go, his posture still, his expression calm, not holding on, not calling him back, just witnessing the moment for what it was. The trees swallowed the figure gradually, the shape of him fading into the light and shadow until he was no longer visible, leaving behind only the quiet of the place, the soft movement of leaves in the morning air. Ethan remained there for a while, longer than he realized, his gaze fixed on the space where Rex had disappeared, not expecting him to return, not needing him to. Some things were not meant to stay. Some things were meant to arrive exactly when they were needed and leave when they were no longer. He exhaled slowly, a breath that carried no tension, no question, just acceptance. Then he turned back toward the truck, opened the door, and climbed in, the interior now empty but not hollow, filled instead with the memory of something that had passed through it and changed it without leaving anything behind. He started the engine, the sound familiar, grounding, and guided the truck back onto the road, the path ahead clear, open, waiting. And as he drove away, the morning light followed him, steady and quiet, like something that did not need to be explained to be understood.